Hello again. Welcome to Unit 2. Glad to see you all survived Unit 1. In this unit, we're going to be talking about the cardiovascular system, which includes the blood vessels, and the heart. We'll also talk about the lymphatic system and the immune system. So we're going to begin this discussion with blood. Now, when you look at this little cartoon here, or this little image of my vampire, don't think I misspelled these words. You've got to pronounce welcome and vont like the Transylvanian Dracula would say. So anyway, I guess you can see I may be a little bit silly sometimes. Oh well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get the pen up because I don't want to be fussing with this thing in a few minutes. So, as I said, I'm going to begin your discussion of blood. So let's get started. All righty. We'll talk first about the composition of blood. Blood is a connective tissue whose cells and solutes, or solids, or things that are dissolved in the blood, are suspended in a fluid extracellular matrix called plasma. The cells are sometimes referred to as formed elements because only one type of the formed elements is actually a true cell. So let's look at these cells briefly, and then I want to talk to you again about plasma. So the first type of cell that we'll talk about are the erythrocytes, are commonly called red blood cells. Erythro means red, so when you see that, think red. Erythro, red. You may see this term used again throughout your studies. But the job of the erythrocytes is to carry respiratory gases, and you're going to learn a lot about this as we continue talking about this system. But these erythrocytes are not true cells. As they begin their development, they contain a nucleus, but they become specialized and they eject that nucleus and the other organelles of the cell as well, so that they can carry loads and loads of hemoglobin, because that's going to be the carrier molecule that takes the respiratory gases. So you'll learn more about that. Then we have leukocytes. Leuko means white. So these are your white blood cells. The leukocytes are the only true formed elements that are actually cells. So I should have said the only true cells of the formed elements. There are several different types of leukocytes. We'll look at those in lab, and you'll be able to identify them according to their staining capabilities and what's going on in their cytoplasm. These also have different nuclei. Their nuclei appear very different in the staining process as well. So the job of the leukocytes is to play a defender type role. So the leukocytes are a component of not only the cardiovascular system, but also the immune system. They go out and fight off the invaders that come into the body. And the third of the formed elements are the thrombocytes, also known, or more commonly known, as platelets. Platelets are not really cells, but they're small fragments of cells, big monster-sized cells called megakaryotes. Now these megakaryotes are going to, megakaryocyte. I saw that right as I started to walk away. That's CYT, megakaryocyte. Large nuclei and cell, okay? So cell, nucleus, large. Now what happens is these megakaryocytes are going to break up, and each of those little cellular fragments becomes a platelet. The job of the platelets is to play a role in blood clotting. Hemostasis is the process of maintaining the blood or maintaining blood flow, so platelets have a job in hemostasis. Now let's back up just a minute to this plasma. Plasma is a straw-colored liquid composed of approximately 90% water, but also within that there are a lot of nutrients, sugars, different things carried in there, gases such as carbon dioxide and oxygen are carried sometimes in the plasma as well, hormones, waste products, cellular products, ions, proteins. So there's a lot of things that are suspended within that plasma as well, and all of these things together help to maintain osmotic pressure. You remember what osmotic pressure is, right? That's the pressure of the solutes to maintain a certain volume or certain volume of a liquid. If you'll think back to the water intoxication case, this should remind you a little bit of that. All right, so let's move on. Oh, I got one more thing, sorry. The hematocrit. Hematocrit is the count of the red blood cells that are within a particular sample. Hematocrit equals, and let's just move that up here because I know if I try to write at the bottom, it's going to flip to the slides. So hematocrit means blood fraction. So the fraction of the blood that is the red blood cells or the erythrocytes is known as the hematocrit. So let's look just a little bit at a typical hematocrit or a typical blood sample. So, yeah, I know, I've got vampire bats. All right, so the first thing you would have to do is to draw your blood sample. So, out of the blood vessel into the test tube. Now, from there, you want to place this test tube into a centrifuge. Now, what a centrifuge does is to spin at a very high rate of speed, and the centrifugal force, woo boy, I bombed that one, forget it. The force of the centrifuge is going to push the heavier elements toward the bottom. So you can see here you've got this red portion which contains your erythrocytes down at the bottom. So that's the most dense or the heaviest of the components in the blood. Second, you have a small little layer known as the buffy coat, which contains the leukocytes and the platelets. Now this is typically less than 1% of whole blood. So you've got a whole lot more red blood cells than your white blood cells and platelets. Okay, and then what's left? That liquid component of the plasma, which is usually about 55% of the whole blood. Now, these vary a little bit between the sexes. Normally for males, about 47%. Now watch this. Plus or minus 5% is red blood cells. For females, 42%, 42% plus or minus 5% red blood cells. So if you look at this, that plus or minus 5 makes it exactly the same, right? Anyway, I thought that was interesting. The platelets and the white blood cells, as I said, usually compose about 1%, and the remaining approximately 55% of blood volume is that plasma. Alrighty, let's move on and talk a little bit about the characteristics of blood. I'm sure when you were a child, or even maybe now, I've caught myself doing it sometimes, if you get a paper cut or you have a cut of some type on your finger or your hand, first reaction is to stick it in your mouth and try to stop the bleeding. Well, what did you notice about the taste? If it's been a while, think back. How did that blood taste? No, I'm not asking you if you're a vampire. Everybody's tasted blood, I know. Sort of salty and maybe a little bit of a metallic taste. Well, that salty taste comes from the salts that are a part of the plasma, and the metallic taste comes from the ions that are in the plasma, as well as from the iron taste, or the iron that makes up a part of the hemoglobin molecule that is within the red blood cells. Have you ever touched drying blood? It's sort of sticky. Well, think about what all is in there. You've got sugars and different nutrients floating around in that plasma, so that can give that stickiness to it as well. The color of blood may vary from a scarlet or a bright red when the blood cells are actually carrying oxygen to a dark, deep red when the blood cells, or when the erythrocytes are carrying carbon dioxide, a waste product. The pH range is usually between 7.35 and 7.45. Now, if you took your 201 course here with us, you might have had a question on one of your tests about when blood reaches 7.2, it is acidosis. And if 7.0 is neutral pH, remember that much so far? Yeah? Well, everything below 7.0 is acidic. Everything above 7.0 is alkaline. So how in the world can 7.2 be acidotic? I bet you got that question right if it was on your test. The reason is because normal blood pH is 7.35 to 7.45. So anything that is below that, which 7.2 is below that, is considered more toward the acidic side than normal. So it is considered blood acidosis. All right, just checking your memory. All right, blood temperature is about 38 degrees Celsius. Normal body temperature is about 37 degrees Celsius. The reason for that is blood will absorb the heat. Remember the heat of the body. Remember when cellular respiration, cell metabolism is going on, heat is being created as a byproduct. So the blood will absorb that and then carry that heat throughout the body to keep the body evenly distributed. So it's typically just that blood is typically just a little bit warmer than normal body temperature. About 8% of total body weight is blood, and that varies some, but not a whole lot. And as far as the average volume, about 5 to 6 liters for males, and for those of you that don't do the metric system, that's about 1.5 gallons, and 4 to 5 liters for females, and that's about 1.2 gallons. Now the body works really hard to maintain homeostasis and to keep these levels pretty well constant. Okay, so we've talked about the characteristics. Now let's talk just a little bit about the functions of blood. Have you ever really wondered why you have blood and what it does? Well, blood has 3 main jobs: distribution, regulation, and protection. Did you ever think of that? I bet you could, if I ask you to, you could probably list a few of the things that would fit into each of these categories. And no, Drac, it's not food. All right, so let's talk about each one of these in a little more detail. Transportation and distribution, I like to think of it this way. So it's a good time to first mention the pathway that blood travels. So if we begin in the heart, and there's really no beginning and no ending for the path of blood, but just to have a place to start this conversation, if we're beginning in the heart, the blood has already been out to the body. So it's returned from its journey, it's dropped off its oxygen, and it's back in the heart now. So from the heart, that blood is going to carry that carbon dioxide, CO2. It's going to carry that carbon dioxide that it picked up out in the body tissues, wherever it may have been. Picked up that CO2, brought it back to the heart. Now it's going to go out to the lungs. What do you exhale when you're breathing out? Well, you're getting rid of CO2. So when the blood travels out to the heart, it dumps off that travels out to the lungs, it drops off that CO2. Well, now when we breathe in, what are we taking in? We're taking in oxygen, right? So we've got that oxygen in the lungs. Now that hemoglobin molecule on those blood cells can bind the oxygen. Well, now it's going to take that oxygen right back to the heart. Now when it gets to the heart's going to just keep pumping away like it always does, and it's pushing that blood out to the body, all areas of the body. And as it's pushing it out there, remember that blood is carrying that oxygen. So that oxygen is traveling out to the body tissues. Now once that blood cell finds where it's going to go, and it may be anywhere in the body, and it could be a different place every time, and it probably is. Once it gets out there, though, it's going to drop off that oxygen. Once the oxygen's dropped off, it can pick up that CO2. Remember, CO2 is a waste product. We create CO2 as a byproduct of cellular respiration. So we pick up that CO2, and right back to the heart we go. And then where? Right, out to the lungs. Drop off the CO2, we exhale, it goes away. We inhale, we've brought in oxygen. That oxygen is going to bind to that erythrocyte and back to the heart. Right, from the heart, back out to the body, and you see the whole pathway there. You're going to get really good at that before this unit's up. All right, so blood distributes and transports, carries gases to the lungs, to the body. Now, not only are we carrying gases, but we're delivering nutrients from the digestive tract out to the tissues of the body, carrying waste products to the kidneys so that those waste products can be eliminated through urination. And also carrying hormones. You knew that already, though, didn't you? Carrying hormones out to targets. So remember, those hormones travel through the bloodstream. So the blood is sort of like a delivery service or a chauffeur. Our next type of function for the blood is regulation. So the blood is going to help to maintain body heat. We've talked a little bit about this already. As heat is being generated in the core of the body, in the organs, in the tissues, that heat is going to be absorbed into the blood and then redistributed as the blood travels through the body. It's carrying that higher temperature with it, remember, and that helps to maintain an overall body temperature. Now, it also helps when the body is overheated by absorbing that really warm temperature and taking it away, or that absorbing that heat and taking it away from the vital organs and bringing that blood out to the periphery, out to the skin, so that that heat can be lost to the environment. Okay, let's see what else. The blood acts as a regulatory component in that it serves as a buffer to prevent shifts in pH. So the blood helps to maintain a normal pH of 7.35 to 7.45. The blood salts and proteins contribute to osmotic pressure and help keep the adequate blood volume and blood pressure. So in all of these regulatory mechanisms, blood is somewhat like a manager or an overseer. And our last function is protection. Bet you never really thought about blood being a protective component, right? Well, the blood does provide protection. And the main way that it does so, or one of the main ways that it does so, is by the clotting mechanism. Remember, we talked about there being platelets that are part of the formed elements in the plasma. Platelets serve as a trigger for the clotting function. So the platelets are going to start this entire clotting function, and that prevents excess blood loss. So when a blood vessel is broken, whether it be ruptured in an accident or a cut or a surgery or whatever it is, the platelets are going to begin the clotting mechanism and help to prevent excess blood loss. So you can bet preventing excess blood loss is certainly protective. And also within the blood we have the white blood cells. White blood cells serve as the defenders of the body against foreign invaders. Some white blood cells directly attack invaders and destroy them. Others are going to help to form antibodies, and antibodies, as we talked about in blood typing, or as we will talk about in blood typing. I've already recorded it, but you haven't watched it yet, I don't think. So what you'll see is that antibodies are going to bind to things called antigens, and when they do, they mark that particular substance that has that antigen or the antigen itself for destruction. So we've got a lot of things going on. Complement proteins are also a part of the immune system to where the complement proteins are activated to help to destroy invaders in the body. So the blood certainly is also a protective mechanism within the body. So you can think of the blood also as maybe the bodyguard, or the cells within the blood as being a bodyguard. All right, so blood plasma, I've talked about this just a little bit already, so let's just revisit. There are several proteins within the blood plasma. Those proteins, the globulins, clotting proteins, and others, but the albumin is the main protein, and because it is the highest percentage protein, it plays a very distinct role in the osmotic pressure. Lactic acid, where does lactic acid come from? Oh, come on. Go back to glycolysis and think about it. In anaerobic respiration, lactic acid is built up. Remember, pyruvic acid is converted to lactic acid. Urea and creatine are also associated with some of the cellular metabolism, and you should remember a little bit about creatine being a sort of a storage molecule for ATP. Inorganic nutrients, glucose, carbohydrates, amino acids, where are those going to come from? Primarily from eating, right? So these are going to be absorbed as the food passes through the digestive tract. Electrolytes, you remember what electrolytes are? I thought you'd never have to see this again, right? Sodium, potassium, calcium chloride, bicarbonate. These are some of the more common electrolytes that play a role in helping to maintain fluid balance in the body. Remember electrolytes? Yeah, I know you do. And respiratory gases, of course. The blood plasma is also going to have some of the oxygen and carbon dioxide that are not bound to the hemoglobin molecule. So, anyway, I think that is about where I wanted to stop this. I don't know why there's all these additional slides here. So we're just going to go ahead and stop.